leap out, get what you need, and then come back and join them, and you're not going to upset your family and be divorced when you get home.
The amount of times I've upset my wife by sitting and trying to take a photograph, and she just says, "Hurry up, come along." So
this is it, because I'm a photography geek. I will spend all day long getting the tripod out, trying a bunch of different lenses, going through all the different compositional elements of the picture. The people that I'm with are not necessarily going to be that pleased by that, So a lot of it is just kind of being aware of that and doing as much of the sort of background in your head before you ever get the picture out, and then just try and be quick about it. Like you don't have to spend an hour taking a picture of a sunset, right? The sunset, you spend as long as it takes, and then you move on to the next thing and try and hang out with your friends and your family for a little bit as well.
Okay, I'll try and do that more often. Do as I'm told. You've just said you can use a camera phone or a camera, but what basic equipment should a holiday maker really make sure they have with them when they're out and about taking their photos?
Yeah, I mean, you can take a brilliant photo these days with your camera phone, and many people do. But if you are in the market, if you're kind of listening to this and you think, okay, yeah, I quite fancy, getting a camera to go on holiday with, some of the things that you might want to consider. One of them is lightweight. You don't want to be carrying a big bag of stuff. And in the old days, you used to have to carry like a sort of DSLR, like a big camera with a sort of flapping mirror inside it. It looks similar to the old kind of like SLR cameras from the film days. They just put a digital sensor in these days. But nowadays, they've got these cameras called mirrorless cameras. They do all the same things that you get with a DSLR, but they're a lot smaller and lighter. So that's something to consider if you're going out and starting from scratch. Also, the lenses that you take with you are kind of important as well. Like, it's good not to have to be changing lenses the whole time. So if you've got a camera that's got either like a fixed like zoom range, you get these kind of bridge cameras and things that have got a massive zoom range on there. They can be pretty good. Not necessarily so good in low light, but you can get around that with flashes and things. But if you are thinking about taking it to the next level, you might want to invest in two lenses. One would be a zoom range, so you can leave that on pretty much all the time. And so the one I use for travel a lot with my Fuji system is other brands are available. But for my camera it goes from like 18 millimeters out to 135. And that's pretty good for just keeping on the camera all the time. But the other lens that I take with me is a little 35 millimeter fixed focal length, which is much, much better in low light. And that means that if I do go into a dark church or I want to take pictures in a restaurant at night and that kind of stuff, it'll get more lights coming to the camera. And that means I can take pictures without the thing going blurry, either because I've had the shutter speed too low or because it's got noisy, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I recommend that. Other really important things that I would take on holiday, and this goes for everything, any camera that you take: spare batteries, spare memory cards. They're the most important things. If you want to invest in tripods and filters and all that sort of stuff, great, go for it. But if you don't, never ever go on any holiday, because these things are cheap, right? I mean, you can buy a decent memory card for a tenner, and you can buy a battery for sort of £4 or £5 off eBay, like a third name brand. I mean, it's not expensive stuff. But if you go to the Grand Canyon and it's sunset and you've trekked all day to get there across the desert, and just as the sun's coming down, an eagle floats across the canyon and its eye glints in the sunshine, and you lift up your camera and you go to press the button and it says out of battery or out of memory, you're going to be really, really disappointed because it's a long trek back to the hotel empty-handed. But with a couple of these things in your pocket that haven't cost you very much money, it will just get you out of trouble, because you can either run out of battery or memory, or you can drop one in the sea, or it can just fail. So just having spares of those things is just massively important.
I just want to add to that, to make sure you've got them on your person as well. I was given a free helicopter trip by the Cayman Tourist Board, and all my memory cards, I had plenty, were all in my bag in the luggage hold of the helicopter, and my camera was empty. So right. no shots of my helicopter trip, just memories. Okay. Yeah, it was awful.
Right. So, yeah, that's a good caveat to that as well. Make sure that you've got them in your pocket and on your person. Yeah, I mean, that's it. I mean, it's because it's, if you're strapped into a helicopter and the overhead is like at the other end, you can't just get up and like wander off and get it. It's not so easy.
No.
So, yeah, I mean, make sure you got these things, accessible, and ready. The other thing I would probably sort of recommend, depends on where you go, but something like some kind of like rain cover that you can put over your gear just in case it absolutely chucks it down. I know a lot of cameras these days say that they're weather sealed or weather protected or whatever sort of phrase they use. But the reality is that none of them are absolutely waterproof unless you've got a sort of underwater housing and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I would recommend having something like even if it's just a plastic bag or something that you can put over the camera to keep it dry, just in case there's a rainstorm, and you can actually get sort of more tailored fitting cases that you can fit over your cameras as well if you spend a little bit more money.
Checking it out before you check in on the John Guinn Travel Show on ukhealthradio.com. This week I'm talking to Matt Widgery. We're talking about taking photographs, decent travel photographs when you go away on holiday. We just covered the sort of equipment you need to get the most of your travels. And just after I recorded this interview with Matt, I took my dog for a walk and I came across a man in the woods with a huge lens on his camera, all camouflaged up. It was very impressive and probably cost him more than it cost me to buy my car. So the photography is one of those hobbies, if you're not careful, you can end up spending a fortune. It's big enough to make a stall that the lens was that big. But anyway, I'm going to stop going on about this guy's lens. But Matt started talking about figures earlier when he was talking about his lens, a prime and a zoom. So I wanted to know if these numbers he was talking about was actually what's called focal length.
Yeah, that is focal length. Yeah. So what that means is that it's how sort of close you can get to your subject when you're sort of stood there. So think of it like if you kind of like you're sort of zooming in or sort of zooming out. If you're stood in you want to take a picture of something that's really far away. Perhaps you're looking at a mountain that's kind of like way over on the horizon line. The longer that focal length, the closer you can get to it. It sort of zooms in. It's like a telephoto. It's going to get much, much closer. And the other side of it is if you're sat around a table in the pub with your friends and you're trying to get everybody in the shot and you're also sat at the table, you've got to be able to kind of like see a much wider sort of, field of view to get everybody on the table. And that means you need a much lower focal length. So a zoom lens allows you to have all of that in one handy unit. So you're not changing lenses the whole time.
Cameras have loads of buttons and knobs and things to twist on them. Is it worth just leaving it in auto, or are you missing out just by taking snaps in auto all the time?
For me, this is what I always tell my students when they come on workshops. I don't care if you shoot in auto. I don't care if you shoot in aperture priority, manual, shutter priority, some weird filter mode. I don't care if you stand on one leg and press the button with your toe. Because nobody cares about that stuff when they see the photo. Mm-hmm. So if it's worked to get that photo, then it does not matter a hoot what the settings are that you use. However, I would say that the auto function on the cameras, they're pretty good these days and they're getting better all the time, but they're not infallible. And there are certain situations that they will struggle with. The classic one is backlighting. So, for example, if you have somebody with their back to a window, for example, the window is really, really bright. They're looking at you and you want to take a picture of them. Most of the time, you'll find that although your eyes look, you can actually see the person perfectly all right, and if you look out the window, you can also see the window. What you'll find is that if the camera is on an auto mode, it will look at the face in the middle, and it will look at the massive amount of bright light that's coming out from outside. It will try and compensate. There's always bright light coming around the outside of them. It will compensate for that, and it will bring the average exposure down, and it will just look like that person's silhouetted. We've all had that. You take a picture of someone, and to you, you're squinting into the light. You think it's really, really bright. But when you take a picture, it looks like their identity has been protected to protect the innocent. It's kind of like just a dark silhouette. So in those cases, that's the reason why you then want to maybe move it out of the auto mode and go for some of the more manual settings.
You've taken your picture, you've been really careful, but it's still not quite right. Can software solve everything, or are you just clutching at straws?
It will solve nearly everything technically these days, and it will solve nearly nothing artistically. That's the trick to it. So from a technical standpoint, I mean, cameras are so good again these days. And if you shoot in, without getting too massively technical, but most cameras, when you get them out of the box, the file that they save, I guess we all know about JPEGs, right? They're the sort of standard picture format that you get online, and when you download a picture, it's in a JPEG format. That's what the camera is kind of set up to give you, which is like it's a really compressed version of what the actual camera is seeing. It's sort of squished it down into a small packet that makes it easier to store, easier to share online, and so forth. What the camera actually sees is a much bigger dynamic range than that. And so if you, instead of shooting in JPEG, you can set it to shoot what's called RAW, R-A-W. And the RAW file is actually what the camera is really gathering. And there's all this extra information in there that you will never be able to retrieve in the JPEG. So if you are using software to edit your images and kind of, finish them off afterwards, do a bit of post-processing on them, if you're shooting in RAW, you can shoot, and I did a video on this on my channel recently about a thing called ISO invariance, which is basically saying that it doesn't matter what ISO you now shoot at in the camera, you can bring it back to exactly the same thing as post-production. If you, on certain cameras, and more coming out all the time, where it literally doesn't matter. So you can shoot 5 stops underexposed, then bring it back in post, and it'll look exactly the same. So most of the time, technically, if you've drastically underexposed an image, it doesn't really matter. If you have if the horizon line is wonky, you can straighten that stuff out. You can crop really far into, because a lot of cameras these days have got so many megapixels. There's so much resolution in those images now that you can crop in. If you haven't been able to get quite close enough, or you're not happy with the composition, you can, within the picture that you take, quite often dig out what you were actually looking for, and you can find that. From an artistic standpoint, if you're trying to get what Henri Cartier-Bresson called the decisive moment. If you're doing street photography, for example, and you're trying to find that moment where somebody's got a perfect expression on their face, or there's perhaps some jugglers in the street, and you're trying to get a good one when all the balls are in the air at the same time, and you've missed that stuff, that's harder, right? I mean, if you've caught somebody blinking, I mean, you can do it. You can Photoshop somebody else's eyes in, I guess. But on the whole, artistically, it's much, much harder to do stuff. So what I would always say, if you are the sort of person that is not necessarily so confident that using the manual settings in the camera, focus all of your energy onto getting a good composition, pressing the shutter button at the right time, concentrating on the artistic side of it, the fun side of it, really. And then let the software deal with anything. If you have really, sort of dropped the ball on, and you come out and it's much too dark or too bright or whatever, these days the software will look after that for you.
Okay. You just mentioned composition, a very big word, something I don't use very often.
Yeah.
So talking about composition, how should a group photo be set up? Because looking at my wedding photos, they look so uncomfortable and they're not quite right. So what's the ideal way to get a group in?
So there's a few things, and wedding group shots are a classic one where it's really difficult to get everybody to look natural if you just get them to sort of try and stand there for a few reasons. One, because they've sat through the ceremony. Usually the group shots happen between the ceremony and the reception, so they kind of want to go on to the next place. And it's the same with holiday shots as well. If all your mates are up at the bar and they all want to get sort of sambucas in, and you'll say, hang on a minute, we just want to do another group shot, and you're kind of fiddling around with it for ages, they will look less and less comfortable as time goes on. So there's a couple of tricks to making the composition work better, and also to get the expressions in the face a lot better as well. So the first one is try and get everybody's heads on a different level if you can, rather than just having a row of people. If you can get some people sort of standing up, some people lower down, some people leaning in, so that there's more. Like the actual points where the eye focuses, which are like on people's faces, is kind of moving in a nice kind of zigzag through the picture. That'll make the, first of all, the composition look a lot more dynamic, sort of a lot more interesting from that point of view. The second thing is to make sure that everybody. I always say to people, if you can't see me with both of your eyes, then the camera can't see you either. So make sure that if you've got a big group of people, make sure that they can all make sure they move their heads themselves so that they can see you with both eyes. And because if they're blocked from their side, they're definitely going to be blocked from the camera side. Mm-hmm. And they'll always be upset otherwise when they say, "Oh, why did you cut me out of the picture? You can only see my ear." This sort of stuff. So make sure that you can see all of them in the picture. And the second thing is that it's the shots in between the shots that are the interesting ones in groups. What you need to do is, and I tend to do a little bit slide, do a few tricks with it. So I'll make a big show of putting my camera up to my face, sort of like, pretending I'm fiddling around with a few settings and things like that, get them all to hold perfectly still, say, okay, I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, and then nobody blink and all that kind of stuff. So they're really like the anticipation is building up, and I'm going to take the shutter, then I go click, okay, one more, click, click, click. And then with camera exactly where it is, I then move my head out to the side, but I keep the camera where it is, so it's still looking at them. Like, okay, that's it. Thanks, guys. We're all done. And then they relax and they start chatting and joking, and then I motor drive it. So get 5 or 6 shots like that, and then you'll get them laughing, joking, natural expressions, and then 9 times out of 10, they're the one that you're going to keep. because nobody's interested in sat there with looking like a stuffed owl, putting their camera face on, looking like a rabbit caught in car headlights. It's the natural expressions. They're the things that will sell you pictures, and group shots are perfect examples of that.